everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is TutorNext, and in today's video, we'll be writing a Python program that displays all prime numbers between two given values. Let's get started. So with our problem statement, we have write a Python program that displays all prime numbers between two integers. Your program should accept two integers from the user, identify all prime numbers between the two values inclusive, handle cases where the first number is greater than the second, and no prime numbers exist in the range, and then it says display the results. So now, of course, for good practice, it's important to state your name, right, using comments, and state the day's date, which in this case is just February 2026, right? And then after that, from SymPy, right, from this library or storage location in Python, I'm going to import the function isPrime. Now this function allows me to easily tell whether a number is prime or not. You see, of course, there's ways of doing it first principle, but it's a lot more coding. Luckily, we have this isPrime function, you see. And then after that, I'm going to define a function of my own, you see, that returns two prime numbers between integers, you see. So I'm going to have define list primes, and my two inputs will be num1 and num2, you see. This is how I'm defining my function. Of course, it's entirely up to you as to how you can sort this out, but this is how I'm going to go about it. And I'm going to have prime. I'm going to create a storage location called prime numbers, right? And it's just going to be an empty list for now. And then I know that if num1 is greater than num2, all I'm going to do is I'm simply going to swap the numbers around, you see. So it doesn't matter whether they enter a number first that is bigger or smaller, doesn't matter. The Python program will handle it correctly. So I'm just going to say num1 comma num2 is equal to num2 and num1. So this is the beauty about Python, is that we can easily swap values around. So num1 will just jump to num2, and then num2 will just jump to num1. You see, we sort of swapped it or redefined it. And then after that, I'm going to initiate a loop, and I'm going to say for x in range num1, right, to num2, but of course +1. And the reason why I'm saying +1 is that when you take a in range function, you see what it does is that it basically gives you a range of numbers beginning with num1 and then increments by 1, which is the default step, all the way up to 1 minus num2, you see. So the reason why I'm saying plus num1 is so that the range will move from num1 to num2 inclusive, you see. So without the +1, it'll just move from num1 up until num2 minus 1, you see. And then after that, what this loop does is that for each number between num1 and num2, we're going to check if isPrime. So if that particular number is prime, all we need to do is simply add it to our numbers list, which in this case we're going to say prime numbers.append. You see, we're going to add in that x. Else, we're just going to, in fact, not else. If it's not a prime, it's just going to be ignored. Nothing is going to happen. So after the loop is done, what we're going to do is that we're simply going to return our prime numbers. So when you define a function, it's important that you have your return statement to return whatever you wanted the function to do. So basically, this function lists all prime numbers for me. Now, all I need to do is invoke it whenever I need it. So now, to move on to the main part of the problem, I'm going to initiate a continuous loop and say, while true, right? This means that the loop will go on continuously until it's broken. I'm going to say num1 is equal to the integer of the input for enter the first number, you see. So the user is going to enter the first number. So notice input is so that the user can enter whatever they want to enter and it gets stored inside num1, and int is to ensure that the data type is turned into an integer, given that a whole number is input. And then of course num2 is equal to int of input where we have enter the second number. You see, that is what we have. And then once we've done that, we're going to move and say primes is simply equal to, now this is where I invoke my function. I'm going to say list primes, you see, of my num1 and my num2. You see, because over here I define that my inputs for this function will be num1 and num2, and I should get my prime numbers in return. And likewise over here, when I say primes, I'm going to invoke my function list primes with the same inputs num1 and num2. And then primes is literally just all the prime numbers between the two integers. So I'm going to say if primes, so if primes is actually has something, right? So if we actually have prime numbers, we're going to say print with our f, and I'm going to say, oh no, f, and I'm going to say prime numbers, right? This is me displaying prime numbers between curly brackets num1, right? So that we can actually display that num1 and curly braces num2, and then colon, then we're just going to list our prime numbers like that, you see. However, if primes is empty, if it's an empty list, then simply say print f no prime numbers exist. No prime numbers exist between num1 and num2. You see, between num1 and num2. You see, and then all we're going to do is we're going to say try again, just like that, you see, and then end it off over there, you see. And then over here I'm just going to add in my command continue. So what this continue function does is that when you move on to the else statement, it's going to print this out, and then when it comes to continue, it'll just restart the loop and it'll start again, you see. And of course I forgot to add in my function or my command break, you see. So if primes actually has prime numbers, it will print this out, and then it will break the entire circuit and the program will end. Whereas with the print, whereas with the else function, it's going to print this and it's going to move on to continue and it'll just restart the loop. So that is how I went about with everything. Now let's run the program. And now when we run the program, we can enter our first number. And so I'm just gonna put in an erroneous case, or a case where we don't have prime numbers between two numbers, you see. So in this case, I'm going to put 8 as my first number, and my second number I'm going to put 9. And notice here it says no prime numbers exist between 8 and 9. Try again, so we know that the program works, you see. So let's list the prime numbers between 1 being our first number and then 1000. And then let's see what we get. And that's it for today's Python problem. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and share this video with those who are hungry for Python challenges. And notice how with my code, it was intentionally long, and there's probably inefficiency somewhere. But that's where the challenge comes in, for you to help me, for you to give in a better and more efficient code. Of course, please give your answers in the comment section or email me at tutornext.success@gmail.com. And special shout out to IJ Beats on YouTube for the special Christian music instrumental background. And I'll see you in the next video with me, Tutor Next. Simplifying success